Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore, back again. Took a Labor Day break and decided to recoup as much of my energies as possible and get geared up for the fall and doing some more whiskey tastings, along with, of course, me doing my podcast. And actually, I wasn't resting last week. I was mostly working on finishing up my Irish whiskey travel book. So that should be out in November if all goes well. So stocking stuffers coming your way. All right, let's go ahead and jump in and do a tasting on another whiskey here. This one being basically a value line whiskey from Buffalo Trace. Buffalo Trace is a reputation of having a lot of their whiskeys on allocation, but oddly, the cheaper stuff is really easy to get just about anywhere. And Benchmark is the lowest price of their line. So this is a bottle I bought that is a liter size, and I think I paid $12 for it, something like that. And this is my second bottle. My first one was like a half pint or something like that, a plastic half pint, just so I could see what it tasted like. There's part of me that goes, this is a value bourbon that might be worth having around, but then there's another part of me that's like, well, okay, maybe not. So I will explain. Now, this is a Kentucky straight bourbon, which means that it has to be at least 4 years old, or it has to say how long it is if it was aged less than 4 years. And this one on the neck says that it was aged for 36 months at least. So we're kind of in that same area with ancient age. Hopefully I'm not going to get a cat urine smell out of this one. And this is an interesting whiskey because what they've done is they have created a line of Benchmark whiskeys. I've never seen a distillery create like a barrel proof version, and just some different variations. I haven't tried the variations yet. And again, as I do a tasting on this one, you probably understand why I shy away from doing the tasting. I have heard that those whiskeys are pretty decent for the price point, but I just haven't had the guts to go out and buy. I feel like I've already spent my money on Benchmark here, so I don't know that I'm going to go any further than that. Now, the name Benchmark, there's a little history behind this one, and I'm going to tell you the name that tops this bottle is McAfee. It's McAfee's Benchmark Old Number 8 brand. Now, where the number 8 comes from, the only thing I can tell you about that is that in talking with George Dickel and Nicole Austin, she said that 8 was a popular number, and Jack Daniels already pretty much had number 7 sewn up. So everybody said, hey, 8, 16, those are all good numbers. Let's go ahead and use those. So likely that was the reason behind it. This is not an old brand. This brand started with Seagram's, and so it was made at the Old Prentice Distillery, which is now Four Roses Distillery. Originally, actually, I don't know if it was made there. It may have been made in Louisville because there were two whiskeys. It was Eagle Rare that was made at Old Prentice under the Seagram's banner, while Benchmark was made, I think, in Shively, which is just south of Louisville. And after talking, if you want to listen to my interview with the late Al Young from Four Roses, he talks about the fact that this whiskey was pretty much developed to get the job done. So this isn't the whiskey that you expect to start your night off with. This is the whiskey that when your senses are dulled and you're really not paying much attention, it goes down easy enough because it's 40% alcohol by volume, and so not a difficult drinker, and probably blends well with the other bourbons that you may have had during the evening. Now, I keep nosing this because it has a really interesting nose. There's a lot of rye in there. There's some tobacco notes in there. So for a 36-month whiskey, I'm thinking this one has spent a decent amount of time in warmer parts of the warehouse. Little char on the nose as well. And before I dive into this, just to help you a little bit more on the name of the whiskey, the McAfee name, it was named after the McAfee brothers, who in 1773 went over the mountains years after Daniel Boone got into Kentucky. They decided to come into Kentucky because they had heard all these wonderful things about it and that they really wanted to settle in there. And so this was still part of the colonies, not yet part of the United States. And so it would be 1793 before, this is 1792. Okay, now I'm going to mess myself up there. 1792, I think, because 1793 is Evan Williams' date. That's 1783. Okay, sorry, wipe that all out. I'll get all my dates straightened out. Sometimes dates, it's better to know the events than it is to know the dates. In fact, for me in history, dates are most important in terms of just trying to figure out what else was going on at that same time period. I really don't care what the number is, just what other events were going on at that time period that might help us understand why people worked one way or the other in the present situation for whatever the subject is that you're talking about. But I digress. So there's a little bit of that ammonia smell in there. Just a hint. So the McAfee brothers made their way over the mountains to try to settle. James, Robert, and George came along with a team of people, including their cousin Robert McAfee, and they joined up with a man named Taylor, I forget his name. Anyway, I'm out of practice, folks. I want to say Taylor Hawkins. No, late drummer of the Foo Fighters. His name is on my name. Oh, Hamilton, Taylor Hamilton. And they joined up as a group with Captain Bullitt. And that Bullitt name may sound familiar to you also because of Bullitt whiskey. The county was named after him. And so now we've ended up with them settling on the Kentucky River just north of what would become Frankfort. And so this is the area where the Buffalo Trace Distillery is. And so that's why Buffalo Trace decided to give a little bit of, pay a little homage to the McAfee brothers, because they were an important part in taming the wilderness in Kentucky and opening the door to all the distillers that would come in. They weren't distillers themselves. So, all right, there is my history lesson for the day. And it helped me find that little ammonia note. A little spicy cinnamon in there too, interesting. For a low price whiskey, this does have some interesting complexity on the nose. I won't say it's all great, but there's really not a lot of offensive notes in it. Cheers. Then, kind of, there's a caramel note there, a slight grain note. More of that tobacco comes through on the palate. But on the finish is where this thing sort of goes wrong, because it leaves a little bit of that toffee note there, but I get a little burnt rubber note that comes in, kind of a synthetic flavor. It's not a pleasing flavor. Again, it's not overly aggressive. If you were going to put ancient age and benchmark in front of me and say, you got to drink one of these, I would probably take this one by a hair, because I think it's much more interesting on the nose. I think it is disappointing on the palate, but it's a cheap whiskey. I mean, it is just a cheap whiskey, and it's living up to its reputation. But it's good enough. And the burnt rubber is light enough that I think after you've probably had this for a little while, it's not going to bother you too much. It's not like Glen Scotia 10, which has this really off medicinal flavor that the more you drink it, the more it just impacts your experience, and it just builds on itself. It's like a big negative hammer coming at you. I don't get that with this. It's just there, and again, if I had a choice of a lot of different whiskeys, I'd probably take those over this. But as a really cheap value whiskey, I think this one is worth a flyer. What do you think? Have you had Benchmark? Have you had the other versions of Benchmark? What's your opinion on those? And I don't know. I bought this probably a year ago, and you can see it's not a whiskey that gets touched very much. In fact, it's really just for demonstration purposes for others. I have enough whiskey in my cabinet that this gets ignored all the time. So, and I should have known, because when I had my little half pint, it didn't empty out very fast. So, it was a $12 flyer. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give me a like, and if you want to leave your comments below, do so. Subscribe if you'd like to watch more of these videos. I got more coming up. Energized and ready to roll. Until next time, cheers and Sláinte Mhath. Nice sweet toffee around the outside. Oh, char burnt rubber. It's the part I don't like. Okay.